Yeah, it is. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Elijah, that was great. Hard act to follow. Just letting everybody know that this presentation contains some explicit imagery. I presume that's why you're here, but it's better to be safe than sorry. From around 1939 to 1942, during the most intense and frightening years of the Second World War, the artist, writer, and occultist Ethel Colquhoun created a body of obscure and explicit visual work focused on the principles of sacred sexual union. It is likely the earliest sustained and explicit visual expression of a sex magic program associated with modern Western magical subcultures, and it was created by a woman. During these years, Colquhoun obsessively explored the world of alchemical erotica, producing sketches and watercolors of humans, angels, and androgynous beings in various positions, couplings, and threesomes, depicting transcendent ecstasies and apotheosis. This is the first and maybe only time that we have an explicit, visually driven model of sex magic and esoteric sexuality, incorporating queer desires and even theorizing multiple participants. Another groundbreaking feature of this corpus is subversion of the male gaze and the apparent centering of women's sexual pleasure as a vehicle for connection with the divine. This important collection expands our understanding of the history of sex magic during the early 20th century, even if the collection was in essence private and practically undeveloped as a system. This body of work is nothing short of radical. At the time of this writing, no clear or explicit documentation from the artist exists that explains the rationale or symbolism of this body of work. In many ways, this is a true detective's journey involving reading, decoding, and educated guesswork, and yet there are still many questions left unanswered. What compelled Colquhoun to fixate on this topic in the way that she did? Was she hoping for a partner to help her complete the great work, the attainment of enlightenment? Or was she working to come to peace with the fact that union with the divine is primarily a solitary journey? Perhaps she was trying to engineer a program of sex magic designed to be undertaken by occult adepts for the purpose of helping to heal a deeply wounded society. It would be lazy to conclude that she was simply driven by desire or obsessed by a lover, and this view would, frankly, reduce the radical implications of the project. Even Colquhoun's most personal magical explorations had universal and timeless possibilities, for she was a woman who always thought big. As historian Hugh Urban notes, regardless of how one conceives of sex magic, the one constant is that its aim is revolutionary. For practitioners and promoters alike, sex magic is part of a wider program of reform and revolution, and this is absolutely true of the work of Ethel Colquhoun. So who was Colquhoun? By way of a very brief introduction, she was born in northern India in 1906 to a colonial family. She was brought to England as an infant, where she was raised primarily in Cheltenham, a community that served colonial families working in India. She trained as an artist as a young woman there, eventually earning a BA at the Slade, Britain's preeminent art college, in about 1930. From 1931 to 1936, she traveled on and off, spending time in Paris and the Mediterranean. While she did not identify as bisexual, she fell in love with at least one woman in 1933. There she is. And she spent many years in communities that included highly visible queer women artists. In 1936, she became interested in surrealism, which is a way to artistically express her occult interests. Although she was affiliated with the British Surrealists, she left the group in 1940 after being required to compromise her desires to join occult orders and to support political movements she did not want to participate in. After the war, she traveled back and forth between studios in London and Cornwall, settling in Cornwall full-time in 1959, where she remained until her death in 1988. Her legacy includes over 5,000 pieces of art, now residing at the Tate Archives in London, several novels and travelogues, many essays, and poems. Her occult interests were wide-ranging and the central preoccupation of her life. She started actively seeking initiation in occult orders in the 1950s and was involved with many throughout her time. Although the group she joined appeared to be quite varied, she was mostly drawn to Hermetic and Celtic traditions that reflected a belief in a perennial worldwide wisdom tradition. Starting in the early 1950s, Colquhoun was involved with a variety of esoteric groups, including the OTO, Martinism, Co-Masonry, Druidry, a Golden Dawn-inspired order, and later the Fellowship of Isis and other groups devoted to Celtic spirituality. Although she never became involved in either Wicca or traditional witchcraft, her command of both Wicca and British traditional magic was staggering, and she took great interest in it. She absolutely believed in the existence of an ancient community of powerful priestesses and witches. Her Indian background also gave her a great interest in Indian traditions, particularly Tantra. But for Colquhoun, the Kabbalah and the Golden Dawn were foundational, and her knowledge of these traditions and also alchemy were exceptional. They formed the visual and theoretical framework for her erotic material. Colquhoun's work is part of a wider conversation about sacred sexuality in the West, which itself is a deeply problematic construct, how it should be accomplished, and what its aims should be. As with so many issues, once we focus on women's contributions, the entire nature of the conversation changes. It should surprise no one that sex magic is generally characterized and defined by the male sexual experience, even in the systems that do stress the importance of women's pleasure. Most contemporary sex magic curricula assume that the magus is male. Women are often conceptualized as passive and receptive in the sexual act. Now, I know that there are discussions that we can have about that, and hopefully we will. Although many occultists today are re-theorizing sex magic for women, trans, and non-binary people, there is still little argument that most of the historical sources championed today were primarily designed by and for men. Although unsurprisingly, sex magic is historically also typified by heterosexual dynamics, essentializing and normalizing social roles and expectations of men and women through the defining and limited language of science, most typically that of electrical polarity. Male homosexual sex magic, which has rarely been historically addressed outside of the work of Aleister Crowley, has been vilified as aberrant at worst and ineffective at best due to an inability to complete a circuit with both gender polarities. Women's homoerotic sex magic is, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The collection I've been working with since about 2009 encompasses a variety of images, likely numbering over 100. Although there are coherent themes and motifs which emerge, the collection is, in many ways, fragmented. In the book I'm currently completing with Tate Publishing, I'm looking at two bodies of material which have some thematic and formal overlap. The first is the Diagrams of Love series, which has two accompanying poetic texts, which only loosely appear to connect with the visual collection of images of the same name. The second group is more diverse, encompassing erotica and images which point to the development of a sex magic project. Union with deity seemed to be Colquhoun's explicit goal, and her esoteric explorations were hardly demure, despite their oddly empirical character. In this collection, the expectations for women's visual erotic culture are simply blown apart. Colquhoun often focuses the lens tightly on body parts and genitals in the moment of penetration. We see disembodied penises, close-ups on vulvas, and abstracted penetration out of context in a way that might be more popularly expected from a pornographic publication aimed at men. Fingers, mouths, vulvas, and phalluses are engaged in penetration and reception in incredible detail. One beautiful pencil sketch is a clear nod to Gustave Courbet's controversial 1866 painting, The Origin of the World, likely reimagined through sapphic eyes, but which for Colquhoun may have also been the basis of a landscape. Colquhoun certainly had a diverse set of occult influences for this project, including Kabbalah, Tantra, alchemy, and Golden Dawn ritual. Most likely, Colquhoun's initial inspiration was taken from her cousin Edward Garston's alchemical text, The Secret Fire, an Alchemical Study, from 1932, which was an exposition on the nature and symbolism of spiritual fire, or life force, the vehicle bridging the link from the human to the divine. Colquhoun was also likely familiar with the general corpus of writings about sex magic in circulation among occultists in the early 20th century, including early OTO writers, both pre- and post-Crowley. Having been born in northern India, Colquhoun also took a keen interest in Tantra for parts of her life. Colquhoun was certainly, like her cousin, also familiar with the works of John Woodruff, writing as Arthur Avalon. Avalon's works helped to bring what would have been a radical set of practices and ideas to English-speaking audiences, and Colquhoun would have resonated with ideas of non-duality and the importance of the female Shakti as the source of divine power. It seems likely that Colquhoun also had seen the 1883 edition of the Kama Sutra published by Richard Burton, a manual of sex, pleasure, and relationships that Colquhoun may have also used as a resource in this project. The influence of W.B. Yeats on Colquhoun's various magical and artistic projects can never be underestimated. Yeats's work, often marked by alchemical, esoteric, and tantric themes, interwoven with Irish nationalism and romantic Celticism, in many ways provides a template for Colquhoun's pursuits throughout her life. Colquhoun considered Yeats to be a prophet, and she was especially interested in the challenging revelatory text that he channeled with his wife Georgie, called A Vision. A Vision, published in 1925 and revised in 1937, included wide-ranging philosophies about the nature of humanity, time, and history. It's very likely that Colquhoun's interest in sex magic as an engine of social transformation was inspired by her close reading of this text, and it is possible that Yeats's explicit focus on sexuality at the end of his own life prompted Colquhoun's project. Colquhoun appears to have met Yeats in 1937, and Yeats died in January of 1939, the year that Colquhoun began this project in earnest. Might Yeats' sexual preoccupation of his later years planted a metaphorical seed? One aim of Colquhoun's project was the formation of the divine androgyne and the individual and collective transcendence of gender, an important theme within the esoteric landscape of the early 20th century. Inspired by Yeats's notion of the solved antimony, the cosmic perfection derived from sexual union, Colquhoun believed that the philosopher's stone, the light of God, is accessed through the hermaphroditic state deriving from the union of opposites, creating the societal conditions for the cessation of oppression. The hermaphrodite, or divine androgyne, was a mystical motif in Renaissance alchemy and Rosicrucianism, some occult readings of the Kabbalah. It infused the work of the symbolists, Martinism, and even the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Broadly speaking, as one version of this esoteric study goes, it was believed that humans before the fall were genderless, perfected beings, and that the refinement of the soul, which was for many the aim of occult practice, would result in this state of androgyny. Just look at that. Another primary inspiration for her interest in the divine androgyne came from Samuel MacGregor Mather's 1887 The Kabbalah Unveiled. Several chapters comment on the importance of the unification of male and female to achieve wholeness and spiritual completion, replicating the conjoined souls of Adam and Eve prior to the fall. Colquhoun took this as a clear directive calling for a gendered balance in the universe and found reinforcement in the alchemical symbolism of conjunctio and the hieroskemos, the sacred marriage of the king and queen, the union of spirit and matter, the great work. In these texts, Colquhoun found affirmation that the divine feminine and the role of women had not been erased from the Western mysteries. Women were critical to spiritual attainment, individually and socially, and without widespread cultural acknowledgement of the divine feminine, there would be no paradise on earth. Colquhoun's ideas about the transition to the androgynous state took a number of different forms. In many of these images, the gender of one of the partners is unclear. While this body of work includes clearly what she might have considered male-bodied and female-bodied figures, there are many points where a person she visually marked as female, with longer hair, a feminized face, breasts, possibly even Colquhoun herself, is sexually engaged with a figure whose nature and gender is very unclear indeed. Often they are bald with sexual organs consistently obscured. In fact, this treatment is so consistent, it can hardly be accidental. Is this an evolved human, an angel, or perhaps a spirit lover? Additionally, some of the images include three people, most often two images coded as masculine and one coded as feminine. Although again, the sex of the blue or indigo figures is not always certain in any of these pieces. It is possible that the other partner could be an astral entity, or even represent the holy guardian angel, thought of in some occult traditions as a unique force which guides the higher aspirations of self. Perhaps she believed that engaging with your anima or animus would serve just as well as having an earthly partner. Some of these images are clearly homoerotic, which suggests that the intended outcome can be achieved without the opposite currents being embedded into physical sexes. Only the energetic currents need to be polarized, not the bodies themselves. In one case, we see the tantric transmission of an esoteric current from mother to daughter in the sketch The Virgin on the Knees of St. Anne, where Mary, clad in blue and red, the colors of divine attainment, receives the energetic current from her mother, dressed in orange Buddhist robes. In fact, this drawing might be an imagining of Colquhoun in the arms of her lover from a decade earlier, Kazu. The idea of same-sex, particularly lesbian energetic transmission, would have been quite a radical suggestion in the occult circles of the early 1940s. Colquhoun's own relationship to same-sex attraction was likely a point of difficulty for her, and this body of work shows that she was most likely trying to make sense of it through the figure of the androgyne. Colquhoun had experienced sexual and romantic attractions to women, making it logical that she would theorize about lesbian energetics. Later in life, however, Colquhoun appeared to reject the lesbian union as a way to secure ultimate attainment. One suspects that her struggle around same-sex attraction was never fully reconciled. Colquhoun's erotic corpus also visually reflects esoteric ideas about the Christ as a perfected and genderless ideal. The central orientation of many of the pieces in this collection is clearly in a cruciform shape, with many of the figures oriented with arms out, or in some cases, as in Heart of Corn. We see a small red figure appearing to be crucified within a blue Earth Mother type figure. It's useful to understand the complexity of what Christ meant in the esoteric context of the groups and writers that were inspiring Colquhoun's work. The Christ, the philosopher's stone, was a state to be attained that signified union with the divine, a state which transcended history, culture, and religion. Christ, like Adam before the fall, was sometimes believed to have been androgynous, and it is in this state of perfected, divinely infused humanity that Colquhoun was trying to achieve through sexual union. Colquhoun's corpus also engages with a series of enigmatic themes relating to sacrifice and regeneration, referencing esoteric Christianity, sacrificial gods, and Grail symbolism that had been working their way into early Hermetic sex magic symbolism through the very early writings of the OTO. Like many ritualists of her time, Colquhoun was also interested in the Grail legend as emblematic of a uniquely European, and for many, specifically British, coded tale of sacred kingship and fertility. And this theme appears in her painting and essays periodically throughout her life. Wagner's opera Parsifal, like other variants of the Arthurian corpus in the late 19th and early 20th century, was believed to have contained hidden esoteric teachings and even the foundation for fertility rituals. These theories inspired the sex magic commentaries of the OTO's Theodore Royce in 1914, later elaborated on in Charles Stanfield Jones's 1923 Chalice of Ecstasy. Jessie Weston's bestseller, From Ritual to Romance, published in 1920, also theorized that the Arthurian legend arose from a native British esoteric system of fertility rites, where the lance and the grail were key metaphors for the phallus and the vagina, the lingam and the yoni. In Diagrams of Love, and in her wider artistic corpus, Colquhoun symbolically layers figures and concepts which at once reference the Christ and the Fisher King, with the lovers seeking divine union. The sacrifice of the Arthurian Fisher King becomes James Fraser's sacrificial king of the dying wheat and harvest, who can also be equated with the Christ figure, and Osiris, whose death and resurrection is symbolically enacted by the candidate during the Golden Dawn Adeptus Minor 5=6 ritual. In both her writings and her images, Colquhoun incorporates cruciform images. The lance in the wound becomes an erotic metaphor for both sacrifice and completion. The Grail, however, is restorative, and in this one image here, where the Grail is explicit in The Bird or the Egg from 1940, from the union of phallus and Grail emerges the hermaphrodite whole. Many of the pieces in the Diagrams of Love series and in Colquhoun's other erotic works are concerned with openings on the body that can serve as portals where energy can be received, either from the earth or a divine source, or exchanged. It's evident that Colquhoun based her own theories partially on Indian esoteric ideas about the flow of life force, or prana. In her art and in her writings, she refers to nadis and chakras as points where energy flows or is concentrated in both the physical body and in the astral body. In the second atom, we see a luminous naked figure, possibly representing a hermaphroditic Christ, radiating with energy and containing alchemical vessels in his interior cavity. Snow Maiden shows a figure with what might be interpreted as rainbow centers of energy at various points in the body. Colquhoun believed that both bodies and sacred landscapes had the ability to generate and transmit forces, and that these connections can be transformative. In the Sunset Birth, for example, we see energy streams resembling nadis running through the etheric form of a woman engaging with the Menentol, an ancient site in Cornwall. Colquhoun's 1940s painting, The 13 Streams of Magnificent Oil, drawing on Mather's Kabbalah Unveiled, demonstrates the openings of the body through which the divine might enter. She expands on this in an essay, Openings of the Body, where she theorizes that the theosophical concept of openings or energy gates in the body may allow for the transfer of divine energy. As women have one more opening than men, this indicates for Colquhoun that women are more highly evolved and more specialized. It would seem that Colquhoun was suggesting that people could exchange energy through various channels and various positions in a sort of sexual yoga. Sketches in this series show a couple in a tantric lotus embrace with couples facing each other in an upright position, likely meant to facilitate energy exchange between the bodies. Also evident in some of these works are the visual streams of energy, probably indicating kundalini and other flows of energy throughout the body that would be occurring through sacred sexual union. Some of the figures appear to incorporate some form of sacred geometry. One contorted couple is clearly attempting to fit their bodies into a hexagram. Another may be trying to wind their way into a cosmic lemniscate. In some places, these entry points are indicated by red dots where the bodies need to be in some way touching, such as at the nipples. The coordination of these energy flows into a single unified stream is one important visual motif for Colquhoun in these pieces. We can see her working through various levels of abstraction, starting with a couple in a union in a hexagram. See if I can get this to work. There we go. With the central columns of their bodies aligned. Colquhoun removes the limbs and other details, but we can still see the penetration, the spinal column, and the energy flow. In some images, the central column appears almost as lips. In the more elaborated form of this process, the bird or the egg, we see the culmination, again, of the union of the phallus and grail, and transformed bird-like androgyne emerging from the central stream of energy with a crown of energy streaming upward from the top of the head, demonstrating connection with the undifferentiated divine source. Colquhoun was exceptionally interested in the power of color and compact imagery to penetrate the subconscious. Many of Colquhoun's magical experiments and some finished artworks take the initial form of a diagram, frequently grafted on draft paper. From the early 19th century onward, the diagram bridges esotericism with the language of empiricism, becoming an aspect of visual expression of the scientism that pervades modern occultism. In her magical experiments from the 1930s onward, Colquhoun embraces the diagrammatic tendency with its accompanying scientific context, suggesting a different sort of visual authority. Her diagrams, and especially these erotic works, do not speak to passion, although they do in some cases centralize and indeed operationalize pleasure. For Colquhoun, the universe was rule-bound, and these works suggest a methodology, and color and form are key to decoding them. The color theory of the Golden Dawn was a primary influence on Colquhoun's work in general. Color theory is at the heart of the teachings of the Golden Dawn, and likely one of the reasons Colquhoun gravitated to the order as an artist. The Golden Dawn employs the metaphor of seeking the light throughout its teachings, and the rainbow is light broken down into discernible colors. Understanding color not merely as symbol, but as force and entity itself was an important part of Colquhoun's magical and artistic projects. Colquhoun's palette for this series appears to have been drawn predominantly from the Kabbalistic king scale used by the Golden Dawn, and which centers around the colors of the spectrum of visible light. Here we go. Colquhoun's visual construction of this series was remarkably consistent. Male or masculine figures are in a brilliant blue, and female or feminine figures are in a violet, red, or magenta, representing the male sphere of Chokmah and the female sphere of Binah, respectively, in the king scale of the Kabbalistic tree of life. These colors descend from the brilliant top Sephiroth Kether, which for Colquhoun symbolizes union with deity, perfect love, and the ultimate transcendence of gender. Notably, in Colquhoun's poem Union Pacific, Colquhoun specifically refers to the colors scarlet and cerulean as representative of the two polarities which will mingle and ultimately be transcended for the perfect union. Scarlet and cerulean blue are specifically named in Exodus as two of the colors which will be used in constructing the priestly garment, the ephod, and its breastplate, as she notes here in one of the many versions of the Tree of Life in the king scale that Colquhoun constructed. She actually makes notes on the one on the left in the two top about the component parts of the priestly robe. Colquhoun was exceptionally interested in the power, wrong one. Where are we? There we are. There are other combinations in this series that are harder to decode. Occasionally, Colquhoun worked with figures and combinations of green, yellow, or red, yellow and orange, or pink and indigo. Rainbows also appear in Colquhoun's wider corpus, and also occasionally in this body of work, suggesting that she may have been building a program of sex magic suitable specifically for the Golden Dawn adept, the Hodos Chameleonis. One sketch that was clearly meant as a color key features a central abstraction of a stick figure couple in Yabyum in a pose in blue and magenta. There, flanking the primary figure, there is another set of stick figures in different opposing colors on the spectrum, representing different, possibly Kabbalistic color schematics. A truly unique feature of this collection is Colquhoun's explicit interest in mutuality and women's sexual pleasure as a key to apotheosis, which is wholly unique in the study of modern sex magic. Women's sexual and spiritual subjectivity is the focus of many of these pieces, with close attention to receiving oral and manual stimulation. The importance of mutual pleasure sees couples forced into awkward and uncomfortable sexual positions. There are also a number of images showing women, showing women receiving oral sex. Interestingly, never showing it performed on men. While spermatophagy, and the consuming of mixed male and female sexual fluids, is another key theme in modern sex magic, this practice seems to have no apparent role in Colquhoun's works. In what is the most developed image of the magical sequence, it would appear that the woman who has been penetrated has become a non-gendered being, achieving transformation as the result of divine union. She is the subject of this great work. It seems likely that Colquhoun was experimenting with the idea of creating a sex magic system that would have been designed for the Western magician, inspired by tantric technologies, but replete with symbolism drawn from Western sources, including the Golden Dawn, the Cromlech Temple, and the early OTO. Maybe she saw a gap and was trying to fill it. However, much of this project was either abandoned or incorporated into her work in more subtle ways. Although some of the color coding in this project reappears in her work for many years to come, and she continues to produce erotically tinged pieces, this particular project and much of the symbolism seems to come to a rather abrupt halt by 1943, coincidentally, around the time of her marriage to Tony Del Renzio. Perhaps this experimental work was as much about pain as it was about pleasure. Colquhoun's own erotic gaze buffers between desire and a detached objectivity. Is her experimental sensibility in some ways distancing her from her own desires? The collection is an interesting and highly explicit focus on disembodied parts, moments of arousal, bodies as instruments and potentialities. That Colquhoun appears to have inserted herself into many of these sketches with lovers that were male, female, and perhaps not even human, shows the way that she moved between the subjective and the objective, making it both a project for human evolution and also very clearly as a way of confronting her own sexuality. Yet in today's cultural context of renavigating gender, sex, and the bodies and spaces we inhabit, Colquhoun's work has new relevance. The excavation of the once ubiquitous, yet now nearly forgotten sacrality of the androgyne in esoteric and occult culture speaks to new generations yearning to escape labels and containers that confine us all. So while Colquhoun's work may be infused with the echoes of her own struggles, along with notes of passion, beauty, and desire, at the core of this project seems to be a hope that each of us individually and in the world we live can come closer to some sense of wholeness, awakening the divinity which dwells within us all. Thank you.